Hi guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be continuing United Alliance Institute by Kitty Cat on AO3. Chapter 5, The Line Between Hostage and Friend. Summary: a dear girl, a loud blonde, and a class. I do want to remind you all that this does include graphic depictions of violence, as well as some minor main character death. She shivered, covering her arms with her hands, trying to keep any heat in. The shower had been needed, but she could feel her teeth chattering and her body aching if she even tried to move. No one paid her any attention, too absorbed in their own conversation to even notice the way she shook. She knew they didn't like her, didn't care for the way she got extra treatment from him. She didn't want it. She didn't like the way he smiled when he spoke about hurting someone, or the way his hands were always tightened by his gun, his eyes searching for anything wrong in the room. She didn't know why he had chosen her, why he dragged her along for sessions once a week. On the dot, same time, same day. It made the cold from the shower that much worse when she imagined him standing in front of her. The doorbell sounded and all the other kids stared at her, unmoving from their groups. They all knew the drill, though none of them knew what he did, the way he spoke so freely or laughed with insanity in his eyes. Not that they could understand her if she wanted them to. No one spoke English, and they didn't bother spending time with her to teach her Japanese, too tired from the day's training and classes to spend more time on another doomed kid. The door opened and she stood slowly, pulling her arms from her shoulders and walking to the center of the room. She tried to look away as he stepped inside, his gaze finding hers as a smile broke over his face. That was what haunted her in the night. Not the guard's stares or the sounds of gunshots, but the smile that never dropped from the boy's face, even as he forced someone to do something they didn't want, even as people died in front of him. How much death had he seen? Caused. Pony. He dragged the English nickname out, rocking on his heels before darting forward. She didn't even flinch anymore as he wrapped his arms around her, the hug feeling colder than the air. "Did you miss me?" he asked, still in English. He was fluent in it, and Pony had to admit she struggled to even hear Japanese accent in it, unless anyone else tried, the few times they did. She nodded slightly, afraid to disagree with him, looking down at the mop of green hair. She had gotten used to the stares the other kids gave her, mixes of disgust and rage. She had gotten them as long as she could remember, but never from people like her, people who could understand what she went through since she was a child. But since Midoriya had taken a liking to her, the others kept their distance. He intertwined his fingers with hers, his rough hands scraping against her skin. "Friends," he said in Japanese, his voice dipping. She had learned that word from him. She hated when his voice dipped like that, turned into something wrong, and it was directed at the kids who stood at attention around them. She dragged him towards the door, hoping to distract him. He jumped slightly before looking back at her with a wide grin, tipping his head. "Let's go," he said happily, his hand not tightening around hers. He knew she wouldn't try anything. What could she do against the one who made everyone fearful? What could she do if their outings were the best part of life here? The door opened and shut, and the incessant quiet that drowned her in the room disappeared, replaced by the empty sensation of the halls. The cold concrete with marks and cuts, stains she didn't want to know what they were. He hopped along beside her, looking down the halls with a wide grin, but there was something more, something always more with her. "Library or park?" he asked, looking up at her with a wide smile. She felt ostracized enough by her height, but the shorter boy made it so much more obvious. She shivered slightly at the thought of the crowded shelves and hundreds of books in languages she couldn't read. "Park," she said quickly, and he nodded, ripping her arm down another hallway. She had tried to keep track of the tunnels and passages he led her down the first time, but after the 5th turn, her head had hurt too much. Even now, he dragged her down a way she had never been before, though the concrete walls all looked the same. She could have easily passed him. She could easily pass any of the kids or adults they fought against. But she didn't want to give him something else to gawk at, to poke and prod. So she followed him closely, trying to quiet the clicking of her hooves on the flooring, taking steady breaths. He paused in front of one of the plain metal doors, though she had memorized the cuts and lines by the doorknob, the rust at the bottom. It was her favorite room in this hellhole she had been shipped to. Taking all the keys from under his shirt, he hummed, inserting it easily and turning the lock until it clicked open. "I got some new flowers planted. I think you'll like them," he commented, pulling her inside and shutting the door. She knew that her perception of the boy was skewed, warped by the time they spent in the sun and by the flowers. "Do you want to see?" he asked, taking her hand instead of her wrist and leading her over. His face seemed to light up under the sunlight's opening, the bright flowers contrasting with the dark walls. He was her age, but there was something so much older about him, more mature. He filled out his clothes, looking less like loose rags on him and more regal. He was only scary because she knew what he was capable of. She had seen it that first day, had seen it in the scars the new kids had over their skin, the worried whispers and looks over to her, never hurting her like others said he did. "I like them," she commented in English, sitting down beside the flowers of multicolors, the slight air from cuts in the wall flowing through them. He giggled, pulling out a bright pink flower and looking over his shoulder at her. He handed it to her, and she took it gently, turning the stem through her fingers. He wasn't like the others said. She knew she shouldn't think like that, but this room skewed everything. She shook her head, bowing slightly to thank him as he giggled and raced over to the playground structure in the center of the room. She watched him swing up onto a bar, shutting her eyes and taking a deep breath of fresh air. The fresh air reserved only when she was with him, the slight salty scent from the ocean she could hear. A place for only blood and vomit, but it was so different here. She wished the others in her crowded room could see how beautiful the flowers here were, how much more alive the boy looked. "Do you like the smell of the air?" he asked, hanging onto the metal bar and swinging down to look at her, still on the small wall. She nodded, and he giggled, swinging slightly. She didn't know why he changed demeanor so much in this room. He had poked and prodded at her in the other rooms, forcing her to undress to see where her legs met her midsection, moving her ears around as he sketched out her weird body. She stood up, trying to center herself as she walked over the unsteady sand to stand beside him. "Do you?" she asked, matching his even gaze as he swung, grinning. His nose scrunched up as he swung back up, looking down at her. "It smells like fish," he hummed, clicking his heels together as he was deep in thought. "I don't like how fish tastes. It's just not right, and the fact it was alive not so long ago doesn't help anything." She hummed in understanding, clicking her tongue on the roof of her mouth. "I think I would like it." He paused in his kicking, looking down at her with a lopsided grin. "You've had it before. We always pull up extra from the catches for you guys." He said it so seriously, so certainly, that she thought she might be wrong. She just nodded, afraid to tell him that she hadn't actually had fish before, and he giggled, pushing himself up to stand on the small bar. "Have you guys started your parkour classes yet?" he asked, teetering on one foot of the thin bar. She stood below him, watching him, biting her cheek as he leaned too far one way before correcting and laughing. "Yes, last week," she said slowly, ready to catch him if he did stumble. Their training had been slow, many of the other kids struggling slightly with different issues. Izuku giggled, nodding quickly as he jumped, grabbing the bar and swinging down to land in front of her. "You might have a harder time. These might drag you down." He stood on his heels and she knelt slightly as he grabbed her horns, not roughly, but rather gently, running his hands over the ridges. It was a strange feeling that she couldn't explain, but she shivered slightly and he took his hand off. "Are you cold?" he asked, as if finally taking the fact she was still wet from her earlier shower. She nodded slightly, grabbing at her shoulders awkwardly to match his smile. He grinned wider, nodding as he took her hand and moved her over to the wall again. "Sit," he said, not as much in order, but kinder. She sat, and he giggled slightly, sitting behind her. He took her wet hair in his hands, pulling strands apart. She shut her eyes as he hummed, his fingers moving through the tangled, wet mess. She should feel scared, should want to take him down like the others wanted to. She should fear him and follow his commands to protect herself. But just because he was smaller than her or more mature didn't mean she didn't feel a bond to him. She had felt the same bond back at the other facility to the younger kids when they came to her for help with getting a move down. She didn't know the right words to describe it, but instead of fear, it was peace. It was wrong, though. Only in this room. Izuku yawned, rubbing at his eyes as he sat up, his skin itching in a way he couldn't scratch. He hated when it happened, and he didn't know what caused it, and it made him itch more. Like something was crawling beneath his skin, trying to get out. He rolled back over, trying to shut his eyes before, but he couldn't get to a good position. It had been hours since he lay down, and he just wanted to move. He stood up, abandoning sleep and grabbing the jacket he had hanging up. He strapped his pistol to his side from the bedside table, not bothering with his belt or knife. He'd have to fire quickly to avoid a drawn-out fight. He might be awake now, but he was still sloppy. He pet Fat Cat, who hissed, scratching at her spot before she curled up where Izuku had just been lying. He leaned down to kiss her head, humming as he rubbed at his eyes and unlocked his door. He locked it behind him again, shrugging his jacket further up on his shoulders as he messed with the gun on his hip, trying to keep his footsteps quiet. He paused, ducking to the side as a guard walked past, rifle at the ready. After stilling himself, he turned back to the path, turning down the hallways. He wanted to run as fast as he could, but he knew what he looked like in the dark. He flipped his pistol out, taking a deep breath as he moved slowly and carefully. A slight breath from behind him was his only warning as he ducked and rolled, flicking the safety off his gun and shooting the floor beside the guard. They jumped, bright yellow hair flashing from under their hat as they leveled the gun at him again. He stood up, pushing his shoulders back and glaring at the man before he could shoot again. He stumbled backwards slightly, immediately pointing his rifle down at the floor, his eyes going wide in the dim white light. "Sir, I apologize for my actions." He spoke too loudly for the quiet night, his voice rising in pitch randomly. He threw the rifle over his back, bowing deeply as Izuku sighed, rubbing at his ears. He was too tired for this. "I appreciate you doing your job," he said, trying to stifle a yawn. "There is no need to apologize for protecting the Institute." He tried not to shift on his feet, doing his best to smile at the guard. The guard bowed again, and Izuku could see the way his hands tightened into fists at his side. Izuku turned on his heel to continue on his way, as someone grabbed his shoulder and threw him over their shoulder. The guard gasped, but Izuku swung his knees up before slamming them down, connecting with the person's chest. "Let me down, Kayama," he complained, swinging his knees up again. She grumbled something in response, swinging him off of her as he made sure to reclip his safety. "What the hell were you thinking?" Izuku heard from behind him as he rubbed at his eyes, turning around again. "Know who you were shooting before aiming that gun." She smacked the guard on the head, and he grunted, bowing again. "Kayama," Izuku started before she turned on her heel to face him. She tisked her tongue, laughing slightly in a way that made his skin crawl. "Don't you Kayama me. You are supposed to be in bed on the opposite side of this place. How did you make it this far?" She threw her hands up, shaking her head. "No, don't tell me. I'm going to have to double the training for all the guards and get you new ones." She rubbed at the bridge of her nose, grumbling something he couldn't understand. "You, go," she said quickly, ushering off the guard, who bowed and moved on. She turned to Izuku, but he stopped her before she could speak. "I couldn't sleep. You are going to train with me," he said loudly, trying to push his shoulders back. He doubted it did what he wanted, because she just chuckled, patting his head like he was a child. "You are getting rest, mister." She looked down at him, and he pushed onto his toes to make the distance shorter. "I want you to march your butt right back to your room and crawl under those covers for the next 3 hours. Izuku whined, rocking back on his heels as he shook his head. "I won't get any sleep. Just let me train with you." She couldn't deny him this, couldn't force him to do anything he didn't want to. She searched his face, and he grinned widely, knowing she had to listen to him. Eventually, she shrugged and started walking the way he was headed, and he giggled, running to keep up with her longer strides. They walked in silence, turning corners and moving through hallways before he frowned, realizing they had passed the door to the training center. "Kayama?" he asked, but she ignored him and continued walking down the halls. He followed behind her, but unclipped his gun, leaving the safety on, just in case. "If you won't go to sleep in your room, you'll sleep where it's safe." She took the keys from her waistband, unlocking her door and holding it open for him. "Go, kid," she said, chuckling slightly as he glared up at her. He wanted to train, not to lay restless in bed again, the screams of that man echoing in his head. But he didn't argue, stepping inside as the door shut. "You sleep, I'll stay guard." She locked the door and pulled up a chair from the table in the room, situating it to look at the door. He didn't move, watching her carefully as she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Okay, he finally agreed, shrugging off the jacket and unclipping his holster from his shoulder. He set the gun beside the bed, crawling onto the hard surface. It was only slightly harder than his own, but with the pile of blankets he managed to find and pull over him, it was warmer. He shut his eyes, watching Kayama as she fiddled with something, taking a deep breath. He did need sleep as much as he dreaded it. Izuku spun the staff around, narrowly missing his eye as he smacked it against the floor, humming. Kayama had left early in the morning with his father, and he had woken to a note from her beside him. Something about how he was reckless and an idiot and snored. He had forced himself to run across the institute, changing as his new guards waited outside before heading to practice. Yamada, as Kayama had called him, still wasn't there. His file said something about his hometown, and Izuku had remembered the name from Kayama's folder. They were probably friends or something before training, but the fact she would leave a stranger with him was frustrating. Surely he would actually be able to practice fighting against the quirked ones. For real, not just for a show of power. He was good enough. The door finally opened and Izuku whirled around, crouching low as they went to lock the door. He took a deep breath before racing forward, dodging to the side in case they fired something. He swept the staff behind their feet, hitting the back of their knees and sending them to the floor as they made a high-pitched noise of surprise. He pressed a button on the side of the staff, the blade extending from the bottom as he swept it under the chin. He grabbed the long braid they had, holding their head back as the knife pressed against their throat. Number, unit, and badge, he ordered, trying to sound like his father. Being this close wasn't ideal, but he didn't have time to reach for his gun before they could have fired. The person under him shifted, and Izuku twisted his feet, prepared to be thrown over their shoulder. He knew he was small, but he knew how to use his momentum. Instead, the man grabbed something from inside his shirt pocket, holding it up against the air, balancing on one hand. 664729. Training, they said, their voice steady with a hint of something else in it. Izuku stepped back, retracting the blade as he sighed and put the staff on the floor. Kayama's replacement, Izuku asked as they put their badge back on, standing up slowly. They were taller than Kayama and smaller, but Izuku hated the braid on their neck, an easy thing to grab. "You!" Izuku shouted, the yellow hair clicking in his head, throwing the staff over his shoulder. They laughed loudly, ducking out of the way as Izuku tried to swing the staff to connect with their back. They stepped back out of the way, their smile so different to what it was last night when he almost shot him. "You were a lousy shot," Izuku finally said, moving to the center of the ring, rolling his shoulders. The man, Yamada, grabbed his staff from the rack, shifting it between his hands as he contemplated something. "You can speak freely in this room," Izuku said, and Yamada nodded, moving to the center of the ring to face Izuku. He swung the staff around, dragging the end through the dirt before he looked up at Izuku with a slight grin. "Kayama tells me you have yet to beat her," Yamada said, shifting his weight. Izuku moved as he raced forward, the staff coming down to the floor where Izuku's shoulder had been a second before. "You need a new look at fighting," he said, and Izuku grinned at the man as he used his height to swing his leg around and readjust immediately. "You aren't as scary as people say," they finally said, shifting their feet back. Izuku grinned, twisting his back foot before taking off at the new challenger. They were slower than Kayama, but their larger height meant they could step around Izuku's attack. He swung the staff, aiming at the back of their knees again, but they spun around, blocking it with his staff. Izuku twisted it around, readjusting his handhold position before he ducked and rolled under them. "Scary?" he asked, shoving the end of his staff into the pole. "You're more cute," they said, and Izuku grinned as they came at him again. He dropped the blow, using his staff to parry. He knew he was physically weaker, but he had been training since he could hold a staff. He swung it around, re-grabbing as they trapped their staff in his. He lifted his feet from the floor, swinging up and around it, ripping the staff away as they stumbled back. He ran at them, swinging his staff around, connecting it with their side. They stepped back, grabbing the end of the staff, before their hands touched Izuku's wrist. He hit the button on his staff, grinning as the bottom extended out and hit him in the jaw. Still, it managed to loosen his grip just slightly as they stepped around. They moved slower than Kayama did, their steps to a different rhythm as they grabbed the now extended base of the staff and twisted. Izuku let go so his arm didn't snap off, ducking down low to the floor. As he raced at them again, they stuck the staff in the floor, catching Izuku's lace and causing him to go sprawling. Their hand grabbed the back of his shirt, stopping him from hitting the dirt as he groaned. His father wouldn't be pleased if he couldn't beat a new opponent, just because they fought differently. I'll admit, that was scary coming from a child. They let go of Izuku's shirt and he grunted, catching himself on his hands and pushing himself to stand up. He watched them inspect the staff, hitting different buttons on the side. He stepped closer to them as they hit the top one, yelping in shock as the knife extended on the top and almost took their nose off. He flicked out his knife, grabbing the man's other arm and twisting it back as he pressed the knife into their side. Don't touch my staff. The soldier dropped it immediately, and Izuku sighed, letting go of them to collect the staff and store his knife. You do the enhancements yourself, they asked, watching him toss it in the air, all the extended sections going back in. He grunted, trying to ignore the pang of defeat as he twisted it around in his hands and held it behind him. We go again. The soldier laughed slightly, picking up his own staff from the floor. Kayama warned me you were a tenacious one. Izuku didn't wait for him to prepare, swinging the staff down at his head. He managed to block it, grunting in surprise as he held Izuku back. Don't blame me if you get hurt. His healing classes were one of his least favorite ones, slow and tedious. He would take English classes from Toshinori before choosing this. But his father was firm in all he had to learn before he would be ready. Be ready to stand at his side as his heir and be someone his father could be proud to call his son. So he forced himself to do each small task Recovery Girl had for him. His fingers were red and sore from the past hour of practicing stitches on a piece of fake skin, each knot making him more upset. He was a soldier, not a nurse. They had staff to heal and tie knots and stitches. Are you almost done with that one? Recovery Girl asked, peeking her head into the private room where he took his classes twice a week. He backed his rolly chair up, stretching his back as he grinned at her. His fingers might hurt a lot, but he had finally finished. Do I get to work on the users now? He asked, bouncing out of the chair. She raised an eyebrow, shutting the door behind her as she walked to the desk. She picked up the fake skin, running her finger over it as he bounced on his toes, waiting for the assessment. I've seen worse, she finally said, and Izuku's eyes narrowed, his smile still up. He kept bouncing on his toes as she finally set the practice down, nodding slowly. You can assist me for the next hour, but you will only be assisting, she reiterated as he rolled his eyes, waiting for her to lead. Anything to get him out of this room that was so boring. He followed her out, ignoring the way the staff seemed to part for them. Are there any level 5s here? He asked, looking around at the many stalls and unoccupied beds. He had never seen them all full, but they were there as a precaution, in case something happened and the majority of the trainees or soldiers had to be helped. Yes, Recovery Girl said, and he giggled, clapping his hands together. The wind user, but we will not be seeing her, she said quickly, and Izuku's heels dropped as he continued to follow. Why not? He asked, as they finally paused in front of a bed, the curtain drawn around it. She sighed, shaking her head as she grabbed the file from beside the curtain, holding it to her chest. Because they are not the only ones who need medical training. She grabbed the edge of the curtain before pausing. And because I do not trust you to be near the unstable ones after the half-and-half user. She opened the curtain as he pouted slightly, looking over her shoulder at the trainee. It was a simple level 2, one of the ones occasionally confused with a level 1. He knew the quirk and ID number instantly, but as he went to touch the quirk mutation, Recovery Girl slapped his wrist away. Izuku giggled, bouncing around her as she started asking the glue trap trainee questions. You were warned to stay away from the female trainee rooms, Recovery Girl said, and Izuku tipped his head to listen. The consequences could have been worse if the guards did not manage to pull her away. She was crazy, the boy whined, throwing his hands up as she got to work tending basic cuts on his face and upper chest. Things that should have been able to heal on their own. I was just tired from training and wandered into the wrong shower. Izuku hummed, and the trainee's eyes shot to his, going wide. That isn't possible. They are in different sections. He sat on the edge of the trainee's bed, and Recovery Girl rolled her eyes. The quirk user stuttered, suddenly unsure as he seemed to remember Izuku. He didn't spend much time with the level 2s recently, but he had in the past. This user was a particular issue, always seeming to get into fights with the female trainees. I must have just gotten turned around, confused where I was. but their voice was unsure, unsteady. Izuku giggled, pulling his legs up to look at the trainee, who nervously ran his fingers through his hair. The oil secreted a powerful glue that could stick many things together, though with the right motions or dilution, it would come undone. The trainee did not even seem to realize what he did as he went to wipe at his shirt. Izuku grabbed his hand quickly, holding it tight with one hand. "Recovery girl, can I get a wipe?" he asked as the trainee's hand shook. "Don't call me that," she said, though she handed him an alcohol wipe before going back to tending a cut on the Quirk user's head. Izuku didn't say anything, wiping off the user's hand slowly. The alcohol worked to break down some of the oils, overpowering the stickiness of them so the wipe didn't stick. When he had made sure he got it all, he finally let go, folding up the wipe. There were small red marks where his nails had dug in, adding to the already bruised trainee. "Stay out of their chambers," Izuku said, standing up as he grinned and looked over his shoulder. "I don't want to see you again for something like this." The trainee nodded quickly, and Izuku tossed the wipe, clapping his hands together in delight. "Wonderful! Now go back to your training session," Izuku said, bouncing back onto his heels. "Midoriya," Recovery Girl warned him, but he just shrugged. "They could get infected if we do not deal with them. Then their body learns how to fight the infection. They get scars. They get stronger." He left the curtained bed, not worried if she had something else to say. She might like to believe she was above him, but she could not combat his orders. He would get through his training with her as fast as he could so he could get to what mattered. Get back to making himself stronger. Without strength, healing did not matter. Without his work, there would be too much damage in the world to ever heal. That is why he was needed. That is why he could never stop moving, stop pushing forward. "Who's next?" he asked, as she finally stepped out as well, a guard taking the Quirk user out of the infirmary. Oh, alright, I'm back. I don't think I have much to say about this fic, considering I think most of it's been answered already, but I'm gonna move on to the next one, and I will see you guys all over there.